The smell of smoke lingered in the air of Pinewood, Oregon for days after the Miller house burned down. The fire had started in the middle of the night, and by the time neighbors called for help, it was too late. Karen and Peter Miller died in their sleep, overcome by smoke before the flames reached them. At least that's what the fire chief told everyone. Their son, Eric Miller, was 12 years old when it happened. That night, he had been at a sleepover at his friend Danny's house. When the police came to tell him what happened, Eric didn't cry. He just sat very still, his face pale and his eyes wide. "Poor kid is in shock," Danny's mom whispered to the officer. Eric moved in with his Aunt Linda, his father's sister who lived on the other side of town. Linda had never married and had no children of her own. She cleared out her home office to make a bedroom for Eric and tried her best to comfort him, but the boy remained quiet and withdrawn. The whole town of Pinewood came to the funeral. It was a small place where everyone knew everyone, and the Millers had been well liked. Peter worked as an accountant at Baker Construction, the biggest employer in town. Karen taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. Their sudden death left a hole in the community. At the funeral, Eric stood beside his aunt, wearing a black suit that was slightly too big for him. Linda had bought it the day before, not having time to get it properly fitted. People came up, to them one by one, offering condolences and bringing casseroles that filled up Linda's freezer. "If there's anything we can do," they all said. But what could anyone really do? Frank Wells watched from a distance as he tended to the cemetery grounds. He wasn't supposed to be working that day, or any day, really. His parole officer had been clear that he needed a proper job with paperwork and taxes, not cash under the table from the cemetery manager who felt sorry for him. But Frank needed the money, and the manager needed help, so they had an understanding. Frank noticed the boy standing so still by the twin caskets. He noticed how Eric flinched when people touched his shoulder. He noticed the man who stood at the back of the crowd, not joining the line of people offering condolences. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy day. He didn't speak to anyone, and no one spoke to him. When the service ended and people began to disperse, the man approached Eric. Frank couldn't hear what the man said, but he saw him grip Eric's arm firmly. He saw the fear that flashed across the boy's face. Then Linda came over and the man quickly let go, nodded politely, and walked away. That night, Eric sat on the edge of the bed in his new room. The walls were a pale blue, and Linda had put up some posters of space and dinosaurs, thinking they might appeal to a 12-year-old boy. Eric barely noticed them. His mind was racing with thoughts he couldn't share. The strange man at the funeral had whispered to him, "I know you were there. I know what you saw, we need to talk." But Eric hadn't been there. He'd been at Danny's house when the fire started, hadn't he? Memories flickered at the edges of his mind. Waking up in the night at Danny's house, realizing he'd forgotten his inhaler for his asthma, walking home in the dark to get it, taking the shortcut through the woods, seeing the lights of a car in his driveway, a car he didn't recognize, hearing voices, angry voices, hiding in the bushes, afraid to go inside, and then the flames. The sudden violent burst of fire from the back of the house, the figures running to the car driving away, its lights off, and Eric frozen in fear, watching his home burn with his parents inside. He had run back to Danny's house, slipped back into his sleeping bag, and pretended to sleep until the police came. He had told no one what he saw. Who would believe him? And what if they did? What if the men in the car found out he had seen them? Linda knocked softly on his door. "Eric, I made some hot chocolate. Do you want some?" Eric nodded, pushing the memories away. Linda sat beside him on the bed, handing him the warm mug. "I know I can't replace your parents," she said, "but I want you to know that you're safe here. We'll figure this out together." Eric looked at her kind face and felt a stab of guilt. She didn't know that by taking him in, she might be putting herself in danger too. That night, Eric dreamed of fire and woke up gasping for breath. He reached for his inhaler, but it wasn't there. Panicking, he searched the bedside table until he found it in the drawer. As his breathing eased, he made a decision. He couldn't stay, not with the man from the funeral looking for him, not with the danger he might bring to Linda, not with the secret burning inside him like the fire that took his parents. Eric waited until Linda was asleep. He packed a backpack with clothes, his inhaler, and the emergency money his dad had always kept in an envelope in his desk drawer. The envelope Eric had retrieved from the burned house when no one was looking. $2,000 that his dad had said was just in case. This was just in case. He wrote a note to Linda. "I'm sorry, it's not safe. Thank you for everything." He left it on his pillow. Then Eric Miller disappeared into the night, becoming one more missing child on a national database, one more face on a milk carton, one more sad story that people would eventually stop talking about, except for Detective Sam Cooper. The disappearance of Eric Miller bothered him from the start. Kids who run away usually had a history, trouble at school, fights at home, something. Eric had been quiet but well-behaved. His teachers described him as bright and thoughtful, and why run away from his aunt, who by all accounts was doing her best to care for him? The timing bothered Cooper too. Right after losing both parents in a tragic accident, why would a kid with no history of behavioral issues suddenly run away from the only family he had left? It didn't add up. Cooper went over the fire investigation reports again and again. The BIA. Official cause was an electrical fault in the kitchen wiring, but something nagged at him about the way the fire had spread so quickly, consuming the entire house before the fire department could respond. When Linda decided to move away from Pinewood a year after Eric's disappearance, Cooper helped her pack up the few things that remained from the Miller family. "Do you think he's still alive?" Linda asked, holding a photo of Eric that had been used on the missing posters. "I do," Cooper said, and he meant it. There had been no body found, no evidence of foul play. Somewhere out there, Eric Miller was alive. Cooper was sure of it, and someday he would find out why the boy had run. As years passed, the case file for Eric Miller grew thin. New cases demanded attention and resources were limited. But Cooper kept a copy of the file in his desk drawer, taking it out sometimes after hours, reviewing the details, looking for something he might have missed. 5. Years after the fire that killed Karen and Peter Miller, Cooper's phone rang late one evening as he was about to leave the station. "Detective Cooper? My name is Frank Wells. I was the groundskeeper at Pine Hill Cemetery. I saw something at the Miller funeral, something I should have told you about years ago." Cooper sat down, pulling out a notepad. "I'm listening," he said, his heart racing with the feeling that at last, the truth was about to emerge from the ashes of the past. Detective Sam Cooper sat across from Frank Wells in the small interview room of the Pinewood police station. Rain tapped against the windows, matching the nervous rhythm of Frank's fingers on the table. The clock on the wall showed 9:30 p.m. "Should have come forward sooner," Frank said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I was on parole then. Wasn't supposed to be working at the cemetery that day. I was afraid I'd get in trouble." Cooper nodded, keeping his face neutral. "Tell me what you saw, Mr. Wells." Frank took a deep breath. It was after the funeral service when people were starting to leave. This man approached the Miller boy. He wasn't part of the funeral crowd, at least not properly. He stood back during the service watching. "Can you describe him?" Cooper asked, pen poised over his notepad. "Tall guy, broad shoulders, dark hair, short, neat, expensive suit, wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy. He looked professional, like he was there on business, not to mourn." Cooper wrote down the description. "And what happened when he approached Eric?" He grabbed the boy's arm, not like he was comforting him, like he was making a point. The boy looked scared, real scared. "The man said something to him, but I couldn't hear what. Then the aunt came over, and the man walked away like nothing had happened." Cooper pulled out a folder and spread several photographs on the table. They were pictures taken at the funeral, mostly by a local newspaper reporter covering the story of the tragic fire. "Is the man in any of these photos?" Frank studied them, carefully, then pointed to a figure partially visible in the background of one shot. "That's him. You can only see part of him, but that's definitely him." Cooper looked at where Frank was pointing. A man stood at the edge of the frame, face turned slightly away from the camera. Even with just a partial view, Cooper could tell he matched Frank's description. "Do you have any idea who he might be? Did you ever see him around town before or after the funeral?" Frank shook his head. "Never saw him before. And after, well, I wasn't really looking." Cooper thanked Frank for coming forward and promised to keep him updated on the investigation. After Frank left, Cooper stayed at his desk, staring at the partial image of the mystery man. Who was he, and what connection did he have to Eric's disappearance? The next day, Cooper began the painstaking process of identifying the man from the funeral. He circulated the image to other officers and local businesses. He contacted the Millers' employers and friends, showing them the photo. No one recognized him. Then Cooper had a breakthrough. The funeral home had kept a record of all attendees who signed the guest book. The mystery man hadn't signed in, but reviewing the video footage from the funeral home's security camera showed him arriving in a black sedan with a rental car company logo. Cooper traced the rental car to a name, George Price. The credit card used to rent the car belonged to a security consulting firm based in Portland, Sentinel Services. A quick background check revealed that Sentinel Services had been hired by Baker Construction, Peter Miller's employer, for risk assessment and security consulting in the months before the fire. While Cooper dug into George Price's background, 1,000 miles away in rural Montana, a 17-year-old boy named Alex woke up gasping from a nightmare. The familiar dream of fire and smoke faded slowly as he caught his breath in the pre-dawn darkness. Alex lived and worked on a small farm owned by Harold Grayson, an elderly widower who had taken him in 5 years ago. Harold never asked too many questions about where Alex came from or why a 12-year-old boy was wandering alone on a rural highway. He simply offered food, shelter, and work. Over time, Alex had become like family to Harold. He worked hard, learned quickly, and kept to himself. The few neighbors nearby thought he was Harold's grandnephew from back east. Neither Alex nor Harold corrected them. Alex got out of bed and splashed cold water on his face. The face that looked back at him from the mirror was no longer that of a scared 12-year-old. He had grown tall and lean, with hard-earned muscles from farm work. His hair was different now. He kept it buzzed short instead of the longer style he'd worn as Eric Miller, but his eyes were the same, and they still held secrets. Harold was already in the kitchen when Alex came downstairs. "Bad dreams again?" the old man asked, not looking up from the eggs he was frying. "Yeah," Alex said. "The usual." Harold didn't pry. He never did. Instead, he slid a plate of eggs and toast across the table. "Got a call from Joe Barker yesterday. His fence needs mending after that storm. Thought we'd head over there this morning." Alex nodded, grateful for the distraction of work. The nightmares always left him jumpy, looking over his shoulder, half expecting to see the man in the sunglasses watching him from a distance. Back in Pinewood, Cooper was making connections. George Price had worked for Sentinel Services for 8 years. Before that, he had been in the military, then private security. His specialties included problem solving and asset retrieval, vague terms that could mean anything. Cooper also discovered that Baker Construction, where Peter Miller had worked, was owned by Vincent Hayes, a powerful businessman with political connections throughout the state. Hayes had a reputation for winning government contracts and silencing critics. Cooper pulled the file on the Miller house fire. The investigator had ruled it an electrical fault, but reading between the lines, Cooper sensed uncertainty. He called the fire investigator, now retired, and asked him to review the case. Off the record, the investigator said over the phone, there were some unusual aspects to that fire. It started and spread too quickly for a typical electrical fire. I noted some inconsistencies, but there was pressure from above to close the case quickly. Pressure from who? Cooper asked. I never knew exactly. Just that my boss told me to wrap it up, rule it accidental, and move on. Said it came from higher up. Cooper thanked him and hung up, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. He was starting to see a pattern, and it was ugly. He contacted the FBI asking if they had any ongoing or past investigations into Vincent Hayes or Baker Construction. The agent he spoke with was cautious but agreed to check their records. The next day, the agent called back. "We can't share details over the phone, but we'd like to meet with you. There might be some overlap with a case we've been building." Cooper agreed to meet at the FBI field office in Portland the following day. As he put down the phone, his desk line rang. "Detective Cooper? This is Debbie Walsh. I used to work with Peter Miller at Baker Construction. I heard you're looking into what happened to his son." Cooper sat up straighter. "Yes, Ms. Walsh." "What? Can you tell me?" "Not over the phone," she said, her voice tense. "Can we meet somewhere private? There are things about Peter, about what he found at Baker. Things people would kill to keep quiet." They arranged to meet at a diner halfway between Pinewood and Portland, where Debbie now lived. As Cooper hung up, he felt the case shifting beneath him like quicksand. What had Peter Miller discovered that was worth killing for? And how was his son connected to it all? In Montana, Alex finished mending Joe Barker's fence and loaded the tools into Harold's old pickup truck. As he closed the tailgate, he noticed a black sedan driving slowly past the property. The car didn't belong in this rural area where everyone drove trucks or SUVs. For a moment, Alex froze, his heart pounding. Then the car continued down the road and disappeared around a bend. Probably just lost tourists, he told himself. But that night, the nightmares were worse than ever. In his dreams, he was 12 again, hiding in the bushes outside his house. He could see his parents through the window, arguing with the man in the sunglasses and another man he recognized from his dad's work. His dad was holding papers, waving them angrily. Then the men left and his parents began rushing around the house, packing bags. Eric had wanted to run to the door to go inside and ask what was happening, but something held him back. Some instinct that told him to stay hidden. So he had crept away back to Danny's house, planning to ask his parents in the morning. But morning never came for Karen and Peter Miller. And Eric Miller became a ghost, a missing child file gathering dust while Alex built a new life far away from Pinewood. What neither Eric nor Alex knew was that Detective Sam Cooper was about to uncover the truth that connected them, a truth that powerful people had killed to protect. The diner sat just off the highway, its neon sign flickering in the early evening darkness. Detective Cooper arrived 20 minutes early and chose a booth at the back with a clear view of the door. He ordered coffee and waited for Debbie Walsh. She arrived exactly on time, a thin woman in her 40s with nervous eyes that scanned the diner before settling on Cooper. She slid into the booth across from him. "Thank you for meeting me," Cooper said. Debbie nodded, ordering coffee when the waitress came by. She waited until they were alone again before speaking. "I worked with Peter Miller for 6 years," she said quietly. "He was a good man, honest. That was his problem." "What do you mean?" Cooper asked. Debbie's hands trembled slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. "About 3 months before the fire, Peter started acting different. Staying late at work, locking his office door, looking worried all the time. I asked him what was wrong, but he wouldn't say." She paused, glancing around the diner again. "Then one night I forgot my purse and went back to the office. Peter was still there, but he didn't hear me come in. He was on the phone talking about financial irregularities and evidence of fraud. When he saw me, he hung up right away." Cooper leaned forward. "Did he tell you what he found?" "Not then. But a week later he called me at home. He said he'd discovered that Vincent Hayes was using the construction company to launder money. Millions of dollars. And worse, he had evidence that Hayes was bribing local officials to win government contracts." "Did Peter go to the police?" Debbie shook her head. "He went higher, the FBI. He said the local police might be compromised. He was gathering documents, making copies of everything. The last time I saw him, 2 days before the fire, he told me he and Karen were considering witness protection." Cooper felt a chill run through him. "Did anyone at Baker Construction know he was talking to the FBI?" "I don't think so, but..." Debbie hesitated. "About a week before the fire, Hayes brought in a security consultant, a man named George Price. He said it was to review office security, but he spent most of his time asking questions about the accounting department, about who had access to which files. Cooper showed her the partial photo from the funeral. "Is this him?" Debbie's face paled. "Yes, that's George Price." After meeting with Debbie, Cooper drove straight to the FBI field office in Portland. The agent he met with, Diana Russell, listened to his findings without expression. "We had an open investigation into Vincent Hayes and Baker Construction," she confirmed after Cooper finished. "Peter Miller was a confidential informant. He provided crucial evidence of money laundering, bribery, and connections to organized crime." "And after he died?" Cooper asked. Agent Russell's face hardened. "The investigation was shut down, classified as inconclusive despite compelling evidence. I objected, but I was overruled." "By who?" "My superiors. There were rumors that Hayes had friends in high places, politicians who might be implicated if the case went forward." She paused. "I've been waiting 5 years for someone to reopen this case, Detective Cooper." "What about witness protection? Was that being arranged for the Millers?" Russell nodded. "We had a meeting scheduled for the day after the fire. They never showed up. The official story became that they died in an accident before we could bring them in." Cooper shared what he'd learned about Eric Miller's disappearance and the mysterious George Price at the funeral. "If the boy witnessed something," Russell said, "he would be in danger. Price was likely there to find him, not pay respects, and now I need to find him before Price does," Cooper said. Using FBI resources, they tracked George Price's movements after the funeral. His credit card had been used in several states, creating a path west and then north. The last activity was 5 years ago at a gas station in a small town in Montana, just 30 miles from Harold Grayson's farm. Meanwhile in Montana, Alex couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Twice more he spotted the black sedan driving past the farm. Harold noticed his unease. "Something troubling you, son?" he asked as they ate dinner. Alex hesitated. In 5 years he had never told Harold the truth about his past. "Just feeling jumpy lately," he said. Harold studied him with wise old eyes. "You know, when you showed up here, I figured you were running from something. Never asked what, because I reckoned if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me." Alex stared at his plate. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door. Trouble has a way of finding folks whether they invite it or not," Harold said. "Whatever you're carrying might be lighter if you share it." That night, Alex lay awake thinking about Harold's words. The old man had been nothing but kind to him, taking him in when he had nowhere to go. He deserved the truth. But telling him would mean admitting that Eric Miller still existed, something Alex had been denying even to himself. The next morning, they drove into town for supplies. As Harold went into the hardware store, Alex waited in the truck. He froze when he saw the black sedan parked across the street. This time, he got a clear look at the driver. A man with short dark hair wearing sunglasses. The same man from the funeral. Alex slid down in his seat, heart pounding. The man hadn't seen him yet. When Harold returned, Alex kept his head down. "Drive home a different way," he said urgently. "Please, Harold. I'll explain everything." Harold didn't question him, taking a longer route back to the farm on back roads. When they were safely home, Alex told him everything, about his parents, the fire, what he had seen that night, the man at the funeral, and his years of hiding. "My real name is Eric Miller," he finished, "and I think the man who killed my parents has found me." Harold listened without interrupting. When Eric finished, the old man stood up. "Well, first things first. We need to make sure you're safe. Then we need to contact the police. Not local. Someone you can trust." Eric thought of Detective Cooper, who had been kind to him after his parents died. "There's a detective in Pinewood, Sam Cooper. He would believe me." Harold nodded. "We'll call him, but not from here. Phone lines can be traced." They drove to K, a neighboring town, and used a payphone at a busy truck stop. It took several transfers before Eric heard Cooper's voice. "Detective Cooper? This is Eric Miller." There was a pause. "Eric? Where are you? Are you safe?" "For now. But the man who was at my parents' funeral, the one who grabbed my arm, I've seen him here." George Price, Cooper said. Eric, listen carefully. I know what happened to your parents. I know why they died, but I need you to stay safe until I can get to you. Eric gave him the name of the truck stop, but not Harold's address. Cooper promised to be there the next day. As they drove back to the farm, Eric felt both relief and fear. Finally, someone believed him. Finally, the truth about his parents' deaths might come out. But the danger was far from over. When they reached the farm, the black sedan was parked in the driveway. Keep driving, Eric said, ducking down. Don't stop. But it was too late. The man stepped out of the car, holding something in his hand. As they got closer, Eric saw it was a gun. Harold stopped the truck. Stay down, he whispered to Eric. Then he opened his door and stepped out, standing between the gunman and the truck. Can I help you? Harold asked, his voice steady. I'm looking for someone, the man said. A boy. He would be about 17 now. I have reason to believe he's staying with you. Nobody here but me, Harold said. Live alone. The man looked past Harold at the truck. Then who's that in your truck? Eric knew he had a choice. Stay hidden and put Harold in danger, or face the man who had haunted his nightmares for 5 years. Slowly, he sat up and opened the door. It's me you want, he said, stepping out. Leave him out of this. The man, George Price, smiled. Eric Miller, you've led me on quite a chase. Why, did you kill my parents? Eric asked, his voice stronger than he expected. Price's smile faded. Your father was going to ruin a lot of important people. He made his choice. Now, you're coming with me. There are still some loose ends to tie up. Harold moved with surprising speed for his age, charging at Price. The gun went off with a deafening crack. Harold fell to the ground. No! Eric screamed, running to the old man's side. Price pointed the gun at Eric. Get in the car. Now. Or the old man won't be the only one dying today. Eric knelt beside Harold, tears streaming down his face. Blood spread across the old man's chest, but Harold was still breathing. Get away from him, Price ordered, the gun still pointed at Eric. He needs a doctor, Eric said, not moving. Price stepped closer. Get in the car now, or I'll finish him off. Let me call an ambulance first, Eric pleaded. Please, he's the only family I have left. Price hesitated, then nodded. Make it quick, no tricks. Eric ran to the truck where Harold's cell phone lay on the seat. He dialed 911 with shaking hands. Emergency services, what's your location? Eric gave them Harold's address and explained that a man had been shot. As he spoke, he noticed something under the seat. Harold's old revolver, kept there for protection against wild animals. Eric's mind raced. He couldn't reach for it now with Price watching him, but if he had a chance later. They're coming, Eric said, putting the phone down. Now what? Now we go, Price said. Move. Eric walked slowly toward Price's car, trying to keep his face blank while his mind worked furiously. If he got in that car, he would never be seen again. He knew too much, just like his parents. As they reached the car, a sound in the distance made Price turn his head slightly. Sirens still far away but coming closer. Eric saw his chance. He lunged for Price's gun hand, grabbing his wrist and pushing it upward. The gun fired into the air. They struggled, Price's superior strength giving him the advantage. He slammed Eric against the car, the gun coming back, down toward the boy's chest. Eric fought with desperate energy, fueled by 5 years of fear and anger. A shot rang out. Price's eyes widened in surprise. He looked down at his chest where blood was beginning to spread, then over at Harold. The old man had dragged himself to the truck, pulled out his revolver, and fired with his last strength. Price's grip loosened. Eric wrenched the gun from his hand as the man collapsed to the ground. Eric ran to Harold's side. Hang on, he begged. Help is coming. Harold's breathing was shallow, his face pale. You okay, son? I'm okay, Eric said, holding the old man's hand. You saved my life. Harold managed a weak smile. Told you. Trouble finds folks, whether they invite it or not. The sirens grew louder. Eric stayed with Harold, applying pressure to his wound and talking to him to keep him conscious. Price lay motionless by his car. When the ambulance and police arrived, everything happened quickly. The paramedics worked on Harold while the police secured the scene and handcuffed Price, who was still alive but badly wounded. Eric rode in the ambulance with Harold, refusing to leave his side. At the hospital, Harold was rushed into surgery, while Eric waited, still covered in blood, Harold's and Price's. A local police officer sat with him asking questions about what happened. Eric told him only that Price had come looking for him and shot Harold when the old man tried to protect him. He said nothing about his real identity or why Price wanted him. Those truths were for Detective Cooper alone. Hours later, a doctor came to speak with Eric. Harold had survived the surgery but was in critical condition. The bullet had missed his heart but damaged his lung. The next 24 hours would be crucial. Eric sat by Harold's bed in the ICU, watching the machines that kept track of his heartbeat and breathing. The steady beep was the most comforting sound Eric had ever heard. Around midnight, the door to Harold's room opened. Eric looked up, expecting a nurse, but instead saw Detective Cooper. "Eric," Cooper said softly, stepping into the room. "I got here as fast as I could." Eric stood up, suddenly feeling like a 12-year-old boy again instead of the almost adult he had become. Without a word, he walked into Cooper's outstretched arms and finally let himself break down completely. When Eric had calmed down, they sat in the corner of the room where they could talk without disturbing Harold. Eric told Cooper everything. What he had seen the night of the fire, the men arguing with his parents, how he had run away after the funeral when Price threatened him, and how Harold had taken him in and become his family. "You did the right thing calling me," Cooper said. "We've been building a case against Vincent Hayes and his associates for months. Price was his cleaner, the man who made problems disappear." "Like my parents," Eric said bitterly. Cooper nodded. "Your father had evidence that could have brought down Hayes's entire operation, and you were the last loose end, the only witness who could place Price at your house the night of the fire. Will he go to prison?" Eric asked. "Price? Definitely. He'll face charges for the murder of your parents, the attempted murder of you, and Harold, and a list of other crimes we're still uncovering. As for Hayes, we're closing in on him too. The FBI has reopened their investigation with Agent Russell leading the case." Eric looked over at Harold's still form. "What happens to me now?" "That depends," Cooper said. "Legally, your Aunt Linda is still your guardian. She never gave up hope of finding you. But you're almost 18, and after everything you've been through, no judge would force you to leave Harold if you want to stay with him. If he survives," Eric said quietly. Cooper put a hand on his shoulder. "He's tough, and he has something to live for. You." The next morning, Price was stable enough to be interviewed. Cooper went to the hospital where Price was under police guard. Price remained silent, asking for a lawyer. Meanwhile, FBI agents arrested Vincent Hayes at his office. They also took in the local fire investigator who had ruled the Miller house, fire and accident, and 3 local officials who had accepted bribes from Hayes. The case was breaking open at last. The conspiracy that had claimed the lives of Karen and Peter Miller was being exposed. But for Eric, sitting by Harold's bedside, the only thing that mattered was the old man's survival. On the 3rd day, Harold opened his eyes. He looked around, the room in confusion until his gaze settled on Eric. "You're still here," he said, his voice weak but clear. Eric smiled through tears. "Where else would I be?" Harold's recovery was slow but steady. While he healed, Eric stayed with a local family arranged by social services, but he spent every day at the hospital. Cooper came by regularly with updates on the case. Vincent Hayes was refusing to cooperate, but others in his organization were talking, hoping for reduced sentences. The evidence against Hayes was mounting, including documents that Peter Miller had hidden before his death, documents that the FBI had recovered based on information from Debbie Walsh. One afternoon, Cooper brought a visitor with him. Linda Miller, Eric's aunt. She stood in the doorway of Harold's room, tears in her eyes as she looked at the nephew she had thought was lost forever. Eric had changed so much. Taller, leaner, his face more defined, but she would have known him anywhere. "Eric," she whispered. He stood up slowly. "Aunt Linda." They moved toward each other carefully, like people approaching a dream they feared might vanish. Then Linda opened her arms and Eric stepped into them, feeling the last piece of his old life connect with his new one. "I never stopped looking for you," Linda said. "Never stopped hoping." They talked for hours, Eric telling her about his life with Harold, Linda sharing what had happened after he left. She had moved to Seattle, continued searching for him, and never lost faith that he was alive somewhere. As they talked, Eric realized something important. He didn't have to choose between his past and his present. He could be both Eric Miller and the person he had become during his years as Alex. He could honor his parents' memory while embracing the future they would have wanted for him. Harold watched them from his hospital bed, smiling weakly. When Linda noticed his gaze, she went to his side and took his hand. "Thank you," she said simply, "for taking care of him when I couldn't." Harold nodded. "He took care of me too." As Eric looked at them, his aunt from before, his adopted grandfather, from after, he felt for the first time since the night of the fire that he might actually be safe. The danger wasn't completely gone. Price had been working for powerful people who might still want to silence Eric. But he wasn't alone anymore. He had people who would fight for him, protect him, stand by him. That night, as Eric was leaving the hospital, Cooper stopped him in the hallway. "There's something you should know," the detective said, his face serious. "George Price died an hour ago. Complications from his gunshot wound." Eric felt nothing. Not relief, not satisfaction, not even closure. Just emptiness where his fear of Price had lived for so long. "There's something else," Cooper continued. "Before he died, he made a statement about your parents, about the night of the fire." Eric took a deep breath, preparing himself for the final truth about the night that had changed everything. Eric sat on a bench outside the courthouse, the morning sun warming his face. 6 months had passed since the night George Price had found him at Harold's farm. So much had changed in that time. Harold had recovered slowly, but steadily. Vincent, Hayes and his associates were facing trial, and Eric Miller officially existed again. Cooper sat down beside him on the bench. "Ready for this?" Eric nodded. Today was the first day of Hayes' trial, and Eric would testify about what he had seen the night of the fire. It would be the first time he told his story in public. "Remember," Cooper said, "just tell the truth. Take your time. Look at me or Linda or Harold if you get nervous." They walked into the courthouse together. The hallways were crowded with reporters and spectators. This case had become big news. A powerful businessman accused of orchestrating murders to cover up his crimes. Eric kept his head down, following Cooper through the crowd. In the courtroom, Eric saw Vincent Hayes for the first time. He was older than Eric had expected, with silver hair and an expensive suit. He didn't look like a killer. But neither had George Price with his professional manner and calm voice. Hayes didn't look at Eric. His lawyers huddled around him, whispering urgently. The prosecutor, a woman named Marta Reyes, greeted Cooper and Eric with a confident smile. "We're in good shape," she told them quietly. "Price's deathbed confession is admissible, and the financial records your father saved are the final nail in Hayes' coffin." When the trial began, Eric sat between Linda and Harold in the front row. Hayes pleaded not guilty to all charges. The prosecutor laid out the case in her opening statement. How Hayes had used Baker Construction to launder money for criminal organizations, how Peter Miller had discovered the scheme and gathered evidence, and how Hayes had ordered the murders of Peter and Karen Miller to silence them. "And their 12-year-old son," Reyes continued, "who witnessed men leaving his house just before it burst into flames, became the final loose end. A child who had to run away and hide for 5 years, living in constant fear because Vincent, Hayes would rather commit murder than face justice for his crimes. When it was Eric's turn to testify, he walked to the witness stand on shaky legs. After being sworn in, he looked out at the packed courtroom and froze. So many eyes on him. He had spent years hiding, staying invisible. Now everyone was watching. Then he saw Harold nod encouragingly. Linda gave him a reassuring smile. Cooper watched steadily from his seat. Eric took a deep breath and began to speak. He told the court about that night, sneaking out of his friend's house to get his inhaler, seeing the strange car in the driveway, hiding in the bushes as men argued with his parents. He described watching in horror as the men left and the house suddenly erupted in flames. He explained why he had run away after the funeral, after Price had threatened him. He said he knew I was there that night, Eric testified. He said if I told anyone what I saw, I would have an accident just like my parents. Hayes's lawyer cross-examined him, trying to cast doubt on his memory. You were 12 years old, the lawyer said. It was dark, you were far away from the house. How can you be sure of what you saw? I know what I saw, Eric replied steadily. I've relived that night in my nightmares for 5 years. I couldn't forget it if I tried. After Eric's testimony, more witnesses took the stand. Debbie Walsh testified about Peter Miller's discovery of the financial irregularities. Agent Russell detailed the FBI investigation that had been shut down after the Millers' deaths. The former fire investigator admitted to falsifying his report under pressure from his superiors. The most powerful testimony came from George Price's deathbed confession, which was read to the court. Price had admitted to being hired by Hayes to handle the Miller problem. He described how he and another man had gone to the Millers' house to threaten them and take back any evidence Peter had collected. Things got out of hand, Price had said. They refused to cooperate. Hayes had been clear, no loose ends. So we used the accelerant we brought as a precaution. Set the fire to look like an electrical problem. We didn't know the boy wasn't in the house. As the confession was read, Eric stared at Hayes. For the first time, Hayes looked back at him. There was no remorse in his eyes, only cold calculation. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Eric attended every day, supported by his growing family. Linda, who had moved to Montana to be near him. Harold, who had become like a grandfather to him. And Cooper, who had become a trusted friend. On the day the verdict was announced, the courtroom was completely silent. The jury foreman stood, paper in hand. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder in the deaths of Peter and Karen Miller, we find the defendant Vincent Hayes guilty. Eric closed his eyes, feeling tears slide down his cheeks. Guilty. After all these years, the truth was finally acknowledged. His parents hadn't died in an accident. They had been murdered, and now their killer would face justice. Hayes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His criminal empire crumbled as other indictments followed. The corrupt officials who had helped cover up his crimes also faced charges. The system that had failed the Miller family was being cleaned up, thanks to Eric's courage in coming forward. After the trial, Eric had a choice to make. He could return to Pinewood with Linda or stay in Montana with Harold. In the end, he chose both. He would finish his senior year of high school in Montana, living with Harold on the farm. Then he would attend college in Portland, close enough to visit both Linda and Harold regularly. 1 year after the trial, Eric stood in the cemetery in Pinewood, looking at his parents' graves. It was his first visit since the funeral. Cooper stood a respectful distance away, giving him privacy. Eric placed flowers on the graves. It's over, he said softly. Hayes can't hurt anyone else. I wish I had gone inside that night. Maybe I could have warned you. Cooper approached and put a hand on his shoulder. You were 12, Eric. If you had gone inside, we might be visiting 3 graves instead of 2. Eric nodded, wiping away tears. I know. I just miss them. They would be proud of you, Cooper said. Not many people have your courage. Later, that day, Eric visited his old house. A new family lived there now, a young couple with 2 small children. The house had been completely rebuilt after the fire, with nothing left to remind anyone of the tragedy that had occurred there. Eric stood across the street, watching the children play in the yard. he felt a strange sense of peace. Life had continued, here even after such darkness. Perhaps that was the most powerful form of justice. That light and happiness could return to a place where terrible things had happened. That evening, Eric met with Linda, Harold, and Cooper for dinner at a local restaurant. They talked and laughed together, an unlikely family brought together by tragedy but united by love. As they walked back to their hotel, Linda put her arm around Eric's shoulders. "What's next for you?" Eric smiled. He had been accepted to college, where he planned to study law. Inspired by Cooper and Agent Russell, he wanted to help others find justice. "I'm going to live the life Mom and Dad would have wanted for me," he said. "And I'm going to make sure people remember them for who they were, not just how they died." Later that night, Eric stood at his hotel window looking out at the town of Pinewood. For the first time in years, he felt no fear, no need to look over his shoulder. The dark secret that had forced him into hiding had been brought into the light. Eric Miller was no longer missing. He was found, surrounded by a new family who loved him, carrying the memory of his parents in his heart. Their story hadn't ended in fire and ashes after all. It continued through him, through his courage, his resilience, and his determination to live a life worthy of their sacrifice. As he turned away from the window, Eric whispered a final goodnight to his parents. Then he closed his eyes and slept peacefully without nightmares for the first time in many years.